Well, let's analyse that US rate decision and the implications for the Reserve Bank's own decision on Tuesday next week. Here's just a little of Fed Chairman Jerome Powell explaining the 0.25% rate rise compared with previous increases that were either 0.75% or 0.5%.
We continue to anticipate that ongoing increases in the target range for the federal funds rate will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time.
Now, one of Australia's most respected economists is Chris Richardson, who joins me now. Chris, as always, it's great to talk to you about this. It's interesting, is that it's trying to basically expunge the inflation out of your economy. It's tougher. And this is a reason why, even though there's evidence that inflation may have peaked in the United States, that they're not letting up. They're going to continue to raise interest rates until they see it gone completely.
Absolutely, but they're also saying they are closer to the point where they've done that. Now, every central bank around the world, in the US, here in Australia, pretty much everywhere, runs the basic problem that there's many, many months between slamming on the interest rate brakes and understanding just how much strength that takes out of economies. You've therefore seen a very sharp tightening all around the world, but so far economies relatively resilient enough that forecasters, including in recent days the IMF, lifting expectations for growth. To be honest, we don't really know yet. It is unclear how much the earlier increase in interest rates will take out of economies everywhere from the US to here at home in Australia.
So earlier this week, S&P Global Ratings reaffirming Australia's AAA credit rating, also pretty much endorsed, if you like, the strategy that Australia's on, said Australia will benefit from China reopening. There's expected to be strong growth there, and that Australia should avoid recession. What about the United States? What about Europe?
It'll be a closer run thing in the US and in Europe than in Australia. But in both the US and Europe, there are signs that although economies are slowing, they won't slow too disastrously. Earlier expectations of a number of recessions and potentially deep recessions, forecasters are winding those back as the data comes in. Again, to be clear, we don't know yet. It will be some months yet, certainly well into the middle of 2023, before we have a better feeling for just how much pain has been caused by the rate rises that we had during 2022. But so far, so good. So far, we are getting the sort of moderate slowdown alongside a fall in global inflation. And it is a global fight. And that's one of the things that's helping the Reserve Bank here in Australia. A bunch of central banks around the world have been fighting this fight, not just us.
Okay, so you've got right now the US with its cash rate, its federal funds rate, between 4.5% and 4.75%. Here in Australia, 3.1%. And we know also there's a Reserve Bank that is under pressure in regards to its reputation for monetary policy, given some of the previous calls. Now, the issue here in Australia is if they keep on going too hard and plunge it into recession, or indeed they go too soft and keep inflation in Australia, which therefore means rates have to be higher for longer, either which way, its own reputation is pretty much at stake right now while there's an investigation into its role.
It is a narrow path that the Reserve Bank is treating. We had that recent information on how retail sales are going, and sure, it's not entirely clear how trustworthy that December data is, but put it together with November, and it's clear enough that the Australian economy is finally starting to slow more substantially. At the same time, however, the Reserve Bank is still sending out those smoke signals saying that they haven't finished yet. Chances are we will see a rate rise not just next week, but I would say one more after that. Again, unclear where it goes from there. One thing to remember is that in Australia, we have had a relatively large gap between where prices have gone and where wages have gone. Our wage system has not provided big increases in wages across most sectors. That means part of our inflation fight is being done by Mr. and Mrs. Suburbs through the ability of their pay packets to stretch. That coming under pressure is helping the Reserve Bank hold back a little compared to some other central banks on the interest rate front.
One thing I noted the other day was that the household savings rate in America is now starting to decline closer to zero. Here in Australia, as a result of the money that was handed out during the pandemic, as a result of the benefit of having low interest rates for such a long time, Australian households seem to have more money. Now, the IMF yesterday did point to the 800,000 fixed rate home loan sort of customers who are going to come off those over the course of the next year. That has an impact at the measure. But one of the measures as to whether Australia's households are going to rein in their spending is that level of household savings.
Yeah, and that gives us a buffer. That is one of the reasons why Australia has held up better. More broadly, you look across a range of things. So far, compared to many other developed nations around the world, we haven't had quite as much inflation. We haven't had the same extent of increase in interest rates, and we haven't had the same extent of slowdown in our economy. There are a range of reasons for that. The buffer we've got in savings is one. The risk, though, is the one that you just mentioned. Australia's economy has always been more sensitive than most other economies to changes in interest rates. In the US, for example, mortgage rates are linked to 30-year rates. Here, they move faster. And even that big number of Australians who took out 2- and 3-year loans at really low rates during COVID, they will feel the pain later this year and into next.
I'll tell you, Chris Richardson, always great to get your input. Many thanks for your time. We'll speak shortly.
Thanks, Ross.